How to sew the mug bag set with Amber Makes. Carry your mug in style with this mini drawstring tote featuring a matching mug mat and teacup zip pouch for storing tea bags. Cutting out. Take the fabric panel that comes with your kit and press it. You will see that all the fabric pieces are labelled with the relevant label above them. It doesn't matter which style or print of mug bag you've bought, they are all made in exactly the same way. So cut them all out and pin the relevant label to the top of each piece so you remember which is which. There are 2 labels on the panel that you can use to personalise your mug bag set. Once you've done that, these are all the pieces for the mug bag. So put them together in a pile. Here's all the outer pieces, the outer base, and all the lining pieces. The handle, there's 2 handles for the mug bag, and the drawstring cover. Here's the 2 pieces for the mug mat, the front and back. And then this is the pocket that goes on the front of the mug bag. And the pieces for the teacup pouch. So put them all together in individual piles so that you can make one item at a time. You'll also need some wadding for the mug mat, a zip for the teacup pouch, a spring toggle and some cord for the mug bag. Start by making the mug bag. First we're going to make the pocket. Take the pocket outer and the pocket lining and place them right sides facing, making sure the top edges match up so that they're both the same way up. Pin together all the way around. Match the corners and then pin together around the sides. Now you need to leave a 4 cm turning gap unstitched in the centre of one side. So fold one side in half and measure 2 cm either side of it, and that will be a 4 cm turning gap. Place vertical pins on the out edges of these turning gaps so that you remember where to start and stop stitching. Start stitching one side of the turning gap, stitch all the way round and stop stitching at the other. Once this is stitched, fold the seam allowances over to one side to help keep it flat, and then fold the edges of the turning gaps over as well. Now to reduce bulk in the corner of the pockets to help it to lay flatter and look neater, just trim off the corners and then trim off a little bit of fabric either side so there's not too much fabric there, and you'll get nice neat pointed corners then. And do this on all 4 corners. Now turn the pocket right sides out through the turning gap and then push out all the corners with your fingers to start with, just so it's reasonably flat, and then take a pointed tool. I've got a pointed stick with a slightly rounded end so it's not too sharp, and push that into each of the corners. Push the fabric onto the tool rather than the tool into the corner, and that will help to stop piercing the fabric. So push out all of the corners so that they're nice and neat, and then give it a press all over so the seams are laying on the edge. Top stitch across the top edge only, that just neatens it. Now take the bag front outer, and the pocket needs to be placed 4 cm up from the bottom and centrally across. So measure 4 cm, place it that distance up from the bottom, and then make sure that it's placed centrally across. You can measure this or just judge it by eye, it's up to you. Now pin the pocket into place. Down one side, across the bottom, and up the other side. Then sew into place, down the side, across the bottom, and up the other side, leaving the top open. Now your pocket is attached to the bag front outer, so you can put this to one side for now. Making the bag outer and the bag lining. Take the bag base outer and one bag side outer and place the bottom edge of the bag side outer on the right hand side of the bag base outer and pin them together. Now sew that together. Take the other bag side outer and place the bottom edge of that on the left hand side of the bag base outer. Match the raw edges as before. Then pin them together so the raw edges are matching. Then sew it together. Once you've done that, press the seams open and flat. Take the bag front outer that has the pocket attached and take the joined side and bases and place the side, right sides facing, on top of the right hand side of the bag front outer. Match up the top and side raw edges and you'll see the open seam matches up with the bottom corner of the bag front outer. Pin together matching raw edges, start stitching at the top and stop stitching, then reverse stitch exactly on the seam. Do not stitch beyond the seam. Now take it out from under your machine. Pin the open seam of the base to the right corner of the bottom of the front outer like this. Open out that out so that you don't catch any in the seams. Match up the raw edges and pin together. Now stitch together starting at the seam and then finishing exactly on the seam at the other side, making sure that you don't catch any extra fabric in this seam. Take it out from under your machine, open it out, match up the top of the other side with the top of the front outer and pin together. And then pin the raw edges together. Pulling out the base outer so it doesn't get caught in the seam. And then stitch together from the seam all the way to the top. That's the front outer is now attached to the side and bases. So the back outer is sewn to the other side of the base and sides in exactly the same way. Start by sewing together down one side. It's obvious which side to do because you've got to make sure that the fronts and the backs are both facing upwards. So just follow what I'm doing here. Pin it together down the sides. And again working 3 stages where you sew one side in place and stopping at the seam. And then sew the base in place. I'm just showing it you as all one motion, but it's best if you stitch it together in 3 parts just like you did with the front outer. So start and stop stitching at the seams just like before. Press all the seams open and flat for a neat finish. And then turn it right sides out, and that's the bag outer finished. You can put that to one side for now. Now the lining is made in exactly the same way. So take the bag base lining and the bag side linings and sew them together in one long row, just like you did with the outer. So the right hand side, make sure the bottom edges of the sides are on the side edges of the base. Sew that together into one long strip and press the seams open. Then take the bag front lining and sew the side and the base all the way around the 3 edges in exactly the same way as you did when you joined the bag outer pieces together, starting and stopping on every seam so that you get really neat corners. Once you've sewn the bag front lining into place, you can sew the bag back lining into place. So again, place the side, right sides facing on top. Pin it together and sew down to the seam, stopping at the seam just as you've done before. Now the only difference with this one is you need to leave a turning gap in the base. You need to leave a turning gap of about 6 centimetres in the centre of this seam. So if you take your tape measure and measure and mark the centre of this side with a pin, then measure and mark 3 centimetres either side of this centre, that leaves a 6 centimetre gap. So if you mark that with vertical pins, then when you stitch the base into place, Start at the left hand seam, stop stitching at the first pin, leave a gap, start stitching at the second pin and then stitch to the corner, and then sew the other side into place just as you did before. Press all the seams open and flat, and there you can see the turning gap is left unstitched. Turn the lining right sides out, and that's the bag lining finished. You can see there's the turning gap that you'll be using later. Making the drawstring cover. Take the drawstring cover and you now need to hem both of the short sides by 1 centimetre and then 1 centimetre again. So if you mark a measure 2 centimetres in from the right hand edge and then 1 centimetre away from that, so 2 centimetres from the right hand edge and 3 centimetres from the right hand edge. I'm marking these with pins. You can use pins or a pen to do this. So if you place your tape measure 3 centimetres from the edge and then place a mark at the 1 and the 0, then these 2 marks you can use for turning it over. So turn the top raw edge so it meets up with the first set of pins, and you can just press this in place with your fingers to hold. You can use an iron as well, but you can just crease this with your fingers for now. That's turned it over by 1 centimetre. If you then remove the first set of pins, now turn the edge over again to meet up with the second row of pins. That's now turned your edge over by 1 centimetre and 1 centimetre again, which gives you a nice neat double hem. Just pin that hem into place. And then sew it down, top stitch down to hem. Repeat that on the other short end. I've done this in advance. Turn it over by 1 centimetre and then 1 centimetre. Now top stitch it down so you have hemmed both short ends. Now along the bottom long edge, it's very important this is the bottom long edge, this needs to be turned over by 1 centimetre and then 2 centimetres. So to do this, if you place your tape measure at the 6 centimetre mark, place a mark at 4 centimetres and then 0. Again, place it at 6 and place it at 4 and then 0. Place the tape measure 6 and then mark at 4 and 0. Again, you can use pins or a pen for this. Because it's quite a long edge, I'm going to use pen. It's an erasable pen. It just makes it a little bit quicker. The only thing is you must remember if you're using an erasable pen not to press it in place to start with, otherwise you'll lose the marks. Now turn the raw edge over so it meets up with the first set of marks. So that's your 1 centimetre turned over. And then you can just press that into place with your fingers. So match the raw edges up with that first centimetre mark and press it into place with your fingers. Now turn the edge over again so that it meets up, the folded edge meets with the second set, and that's now turned it over by 2 centimetres. By measuring and marking this way, it's a little bit quicker because you're doing both sets of marks at the same time. Also, you can guarantee that you'll have exactly the same width hem all the way along, which will give you a much neater finish. This 2 centimetre turnover is going to be the casing for the drawstring cord, which you'll put in at the end of the bag that closes it. Now I'm just double checking to show you that that's a 2 centimetres hem. Now stitch into place close to the bottom turned over edge. So now you've got that hemmed, and that's your casing, and the side edges are hemmed into place as well. Put this to one side for now. Making the handles. Take one of the bag handles and fold it in half lengthways with right sides facing. Make sure that the top long raw edges meet up as well as the side raw edges, and then just pin it together along the length to hold it in place. Put a pin at either end and then just pop a pin in the centre. Now stitch together along the long edge. Open it out and press the seam open. You need to turn it right sides out, so I've just tacked across the end because I'm going to use a turning tube and you need to tack it for that. If you're not using a turning tube, then just turn it right sides out. But using a turning tube is just quicker and easier. So turn it right sides out and then remove those long tacking stitches that you put at the other short end just to open up the tube and remove the stick. Now press it so the seam lays running down the centre of the back. Press it flat, then top stitch down both long edges to neaten. Once you've done that, just trim off the ends just to straighten them and remove any frayed edges, as it just makes it easier and neater when you insert the handles later. Now repeat this process exactly the same with the other handles, so you make 2 identical bag handles and put them to one side. Assembling the mug bag. Take the bag outer and the 2 handles and we're going to pin them to the bag. Starting on the bag front, measure 1.5 centimetres inwards from the left side seam and mark that with a pin. Now take one handle and place it right sides down so that you've got the seam on top, and put the outer edge of it level with the pin. The handle should stick up just about 0.5 centimetre, not very much, but just a little bit above the raw edge of the bag front outer to make it extra secure. So pin it into place 1.5 centimetres from the seam, and then making sure it's laying straight, pin it into place just a little bit further down. This will help to keep it straight. Now measure from the right side seam, where the front outer joins the side outer, measure 1.5 centimetres inwards from that side seam. Loop the handle round, making sure it stays straight, and place the outer edge of it on that 1.5 centimetre pin. Again, make sure it's sticking out above the top, just about 0.5 centimetre to give it extra strength. And same with the other end of the handle. Pin it into place a little bit further down, just about 1 inch, just to hold it straight. Now tack it together across the top and then a little bit further down as well. Now that handle is tacked to the front of the bag. Tack the other handle to the back of the bag in exactly the same positions, 1.5 centimetres in from the side seams. So now your handles are attached to the bag. You need to find the centre of the back of the bag, so fold it in half, matching up those side seams, and place a pin at the top just so that you can see where the centre is, or you can measure this if you prefer. It's the centre point between the 2 handles. Now take the drawstring cover and place it right sides down on top, matching the raw edges of the top of the drawstring cover with the raw edges at the top of the bag, and pin it into place. And then pin it in a little bit further down just so that that side edge stays straight while you're sewing it in place. Now pin the drawstring cover all round the top of the bag. As you're going past the side seams, just make sure when you're pinning the cover into place that they stay open and flat. It will just give you a neater finish and less bulk. If you just have a little check and put a pin through them, you can put them vertically if that helps. Remember, the ends of the handles are sticking up a little bit away of the bag, so they'll stick up beyond the drawstring cover. Just make sure you match up the raw edge of the cover with the raw edge of the top of the bag. And then continue pinning it into place all the way around. When you reach those side seams that you will have pressed open earlier, but just to make sure they haven't folded back over, pin them into place just to be sure. And continue all the way round. Now you'll reach back where you started. This end of the cover will overlap the other end. So you just need to pin it into place so it overlaps, but you will need to take out the pins below that you put in when you started, only because you won't be able to see them when you're sewing and you don't want to sew over them. So I'm just going to put a vertical pin in here, remove the horizontal pin so that I can see it. Then I can pin the overlap drawstring cover on top and then remove that pin. and then pin the other end into place. I'm going to just move that pin over slightly, and then I'm going to pin the cover so that it runs straight. This will just help to keep it nice and straight while I'm sewing it together. So you can see there's an overlap. Now sew it together all the way around the top. So you've got the bag outer, the drawstring cover and the handles. Here they are, all sewn together, all the way around the top edge. And you can see that all the seams are now open as well. Now take the bag lining that you made earlier. You can remove any labels that you've left on them. You won't need them now. And turn the bag lining so it's wrong sides out. And then place the outer and the drawstring cover inside the lining, and now they're right sides facing. So you need to pin the lining to the outer, but you need to match up those side seams. So because the drawstring cover's in the way, you can't see them from the right side, so you just have to turn it around. So if you push a pin through the side seam of the lining, just make sure it comes out through the seam on the outer. Pin it together at the side seams first, because it's important that these match up. So again, push a pin through the lining seam, then have a look on the inside and make sure it comes out through the seam in the outer. You can just move it over slightly if it doesn't, and then pin it together, and then you can remove that pin. So make sure the drawstring cover stays facing downwards all the time, so that there's no little bits that are poking upwards that will get caught in this seam, because we're sewing quite a few layers together here. So again, matching up the side seams. It's important if you take the little extra bit of time here, because the whole bag will line up better if the outer and the lining are in exactly the same places. So I'm just checking by pushing it through, so you can see that that one didn't match up exactly. So all you have to do is hold the pin in place on the lining, and then push it back, pull it apart, and then push it in, and then you know that those seams are right together. Once you've anchored it together at all of those side seams, you can then pin it together around the top. So the raw edges of the bag outer and the drawstring cover need to match up with the raw top edges of the lining. And again, you will see that the handles are sticking up a little bit above. It's about 1/2 centimetre. It makes them extra strong and stops them being pulled out when you're carrying your bag later on. So I'm just pinning it together now between all of those side seams. Once it's pinned into place, sew it together all the way around the top. And now it will look like this. Now I'm going to press that lining seam open. So if you pull the outer and the lining apart, you can press it open, and it was just easier to get the seam on the top. Now put your fingers through the gap in the lining and grab hold of the bottom of the bag outer and pull it all the way through, so that you're turning the whole thing right sides out. Once that's done, you now need to close the turning gap. Because you folded the edges in earlier, all you need to do is pin it together, and then you can slip stitch together by hand or top stitch by machine. I've top stitched by machine just to close the gap in the lining. Now push the lining inside the outer, making sure all the bottom corners are together. Undo any extra pins that you put in the drawstring cover, and then fold the cover inside the bag. You now need to remove the tacking stitches, because you put the extra tacking stitches in from the handles when you were holding them straight just while you were sewing. So that extra row of tacking stitches, just remove these now, because the handles need to be facing upwards. It's worth putting these in though, because it means that your handles are nice and straight. Otherwise sometimes they can come out a bit slanted. If you pin them in place rather than tack them, then sometimes the pins can get caught in the fabric while you're sewing, or on your fingers while you're turning it right sides out. So it's worth putting tacking stitches in here. So just remove all the stitches and then the loose tacking threads. And now the handles are facing upwards. So push the cover inside the bag, and the seam that joins the lining to the outer needs to be lying right along the top. So just fold it under with your fingers, make sure the drawstring cover is right inside, and then give it a good press as well, just to make sure that that seam is lying right on the top edge. Now you need to top stitch all the way around the top. First of all, top stitch 5mm from the top, and then do another row 1cm from the top. As you can see here, there are 2 lines of top stitching. This holds the drawstring cover neatly inside, and it also adds a little decoration as well. Now all that's left to do is thread the cord through. So pull the drawstring cover to the outside and take your cord and put a safety pin on one end. Now thread that through the flap that's on the top, as you can see here, because one end of the flap is on top, the drawstring cover is on top, and one end of the drawstring cover is underneath. This end needs to go into the drawstring cover end that's on top. So thread the safety pin all the way through the casing. It'll be fairly easy to do. It's a 2cm wide casing and you've only got narrow cord for this. So thread the safety pin all the way through until it comes out at the other end. And then pull the cord, making sure that there is still some at the other end, and take the safety pin off. Just trim off the very end of that so it's a nice straight end so that you can get it through the toggle. Now you can use a 1-hole toggle or a 2-hole toggle. I've used a 2-hole toggle for this one, but it doesn't really matter. If you've used a 2-hole toggle, put one end of the cord through one hole and one through the other. If you've used a 1-hole toggle, put both ends of the cord through the same hole. Once they're through the toggle, open up the drawstring cover just to make sure that the toggle is at the end of the seam. You can adjust the cord at this stage to be sure, because you don't want the toggle to tighten it too much. The toggle needs to sit at the ends of the drawstring cover, and then tie the 2 ends in a knot. You might need to move the toggle slightly so there's enough room to do this. Tie them in a knot, double check that the toggle is at the end, and then tighten these really tightly by opening them on one side and then pulling the 2 ends on the other side. Now that's nice and tight, you can snip off the ends of the cord and your mug bag is complete. You've got your little pocket where you can store tea bags or sachets of coffee or sugar. Pull up the toggle to hold it neatly, and there's your handles, or pop your lunch inside. And your bag is now finished. Making the mug mat. Take the mug mat front and the mug mat back and place them right sides together, making sure the top edges match up with the top edges so they're the same way up, but place them right sides facing with all the raw edges matching. Now place these 2 pieces centrally on top of the wadding that you cut earlier. The measurements for this are all listed in the instructions that you have with your kit. Pin it together all the way around through all 3 layers, but making sure that the raw edges of the mug mat front and the mug mat back are matching up. Now you need to leave a turning gap in the centre of one side, so measure across the side and mark the centre. Now measure 3 centimetres either side of this central mark, and that will leave a 6 centimetre gap in the middle. Place vertical pins at this point so that you remember to start and stop stitching. Now start stitching one side of the turning gap all the way around and stop stitching on the other side. Now it will look like this, and I've just folded the top layer inside and pressed it. So the first thing you need to do is trim the wadding so it's level with the raw edges of the fabric. I like to keep the wadding in my seam allowance for the mug mat, is it creates a slightly raised edge around the edge, which makes it look really nice when you're making a mat. Now, to reduce the bulk that's in the corners of the mat so you get nice neat corners, trim off the corners and then trim off a little bit either side of the corners, so that the less fabric you've got in the corner the better. You just get nice neat pointed edges then. Once that's done, you can turn the whole mat right sides out through that turning gap. Just fold it through carefully and gently, and then push your fingers in the corners to just push out the corners to start with. And then take a rounded tool, I've got a rounded end of a stick here, and push that into the corners. Make sure you push the fabric onto the tool rather than the tool into the corner, and you're less likely to pierce the fabric. But push it out as much as you can, just to give you a nice, neat, pointed corner. Then roll the fabric so that the seam is laying right on the edge, and then fold the edges of the turning gap to the inside and give it a press. Top stitch round the edge, and then I also top stitch around the inner edge, and you could add any other quilting lines to decorate here if you like, and your mug mat is finished. Making the mug pouch. We'll start by adding the zip tabs. Take one mug pouch zip tab and fold it in half with wrong sides together, matching raw edges, and just crease it with your fingers to find the centre. Now open it out and fold the long raw edges so they meet in the centre at that crease, and again you can just crease them with your fingers or you can press it. So now they both meet at the centre, fold it in half again, and that encloses all the raw edges, and that's the zip tab finished. Give it a press to hold the creases nicely in place. And then make the other zip tab in exactly the same way. Press them both. Now take your zip and just trim off the end just inside that metal end. It just neatens the end and stops you stitching through the end. It makes it a bit safer. Now take one of the zip tabs and place the end of that cut zip right inside, so it goes right up to the crease, and place it centrally so you've got some of the zip tab that sticks out either end of the zip, and then pin it into place. If you put your pins in vertically, it does hold it better, and it's also easier to sew. Now stitch the zip tab in place all the way down close to the edge so that you can go through the front and the back. So you can see I've sewn through the front and the back. Now place this on your ironing board or an ironing mat. Now we're going to trim the zip. You need to have 9 centimetres of teeth that will be showing. So mark and measure 9 centimetres from the side of the zip tab, the seam side, on there. Now open up the zip. This is why we put it on the ironing board, because the pins will hold it in place. Open up the zip slider so that it's well out of the way, because you don't want to cut that off. You now need to cut to the left of these pins. So I'm going to cut it just roughly to the left of these pins. It's about 1 centimetre. The pins are where the edge of the next zip tab will go. So this is going to go inside the zip tab. So pop your zip tape, lift it up and put it inside. Now you can see I haven't cut off enough, so I need to cut off a little bit more because the edge of that zip tab needs to be level with my pins. So trim off a little bit more, but by keeping the pins in your ironing board or mat, it holds that zip in place. So again, slide the ends of the zip onto the tab, fold the tab over, again with a little bit of tab sticking out of either end. Now you can see the tab meets up with my pins. So pin it together through all the layers so that the zip is sandwiched inside the zip tab. And then before you do any more sewing, just double check that you've got 9 centimetres teeth between the tabs. Now stitch together along that edge like this. Now you can trim the ends of these zip tabs. The reason you make them bigger to start with is just easier to sew it in place when they stick out either end, and then trim it to fit later. Trying to sew it exactly the right length is very difficult. So that's the easy way to do your zip. So put that to one side for now. Inserting the zip. Take the mug pouch front outer and place it right sides up. Now take the zip that you've put the tabs on and place that right sides down on top, making sure it's central. You should have 1 centimetre either side of the zip. So just measure it to make sure that your zip and your tab with the tabs attached is central along the top edge of the mug pouch front outer, and then pin it into place, making sure that the edge of the zip tape matches up with the raw edge of the fabric. Now tack it into place close to the seam, the edge. Use about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now take the mug pouch front lining and place that right sides down on top. The top raw edge and the side raw edges should all match up, so that you've got the zip will be sandwiched between the outer and the lining, and the outer and the lining are right sides facing. Pin it together at either side and then pop a pin in the centre. Now sew those layers together using the zip foot on your machine. Once that's done, open up those 2 pieces and refold them so that they are wrong sides facing. Now take the mug pouch back outer and place the other side of the zip, the unstitched side, on top so that the front outer and the back outer are right sides facing. Make sure the zip is central. If you make sure the side edges of the front outer and the back outer are matching up, then it will be central. Making sure that the zip tape is matching up with the raw edge of the fabric on the mug pouch back outer. Pin it into place at either end and then pop a pin in the centre to keep it straight and tack it into place. Once that's done and it's all tacked into place, take the mug pouch back lining and place that right sides down on top so that you're sandwiching the other side of the zip between the back outer and the back lining. Again, match up the raw edges on the sides and the top. And the other side and the top. And then pop a pin in the centre, making sure those raw edges stay matching up, and stitch it into place using a zip foot. Once that's all sewn into place, refold it now so that their pieces are all wrong sides facing. So you've got the front outer and the front lining wrong sides facing. Now give it a press so that that seam lies right on the edge. If you pull the pieces so that the bottom edges match up and the side edges match up, do it from the lining side and the outer side, then that will just make it nice and neat. It's worth pressing it here as well. So make sure the seam's on the edge, then top stitch along the top of the fabric on the front and the back. It will look like this once it's done, and that will give you a nice neat edge to the top of your zip pouch. Making the handle. Fold the mug pouch handle in half lengthways with right sides facing. Make sure the top raw long edges and the side edges match up, and then pin it together along the top edge, and then sew it together. Once you've made that tube, I'm going to use it, you need to turn it right sides out. I'm going to use a turning tube for this, so I've tacked it together across the top short edge. If you don't have a turning tube, then simply turn it right sides out, but this is just a quicker way to do it. Turn it right sides out, and then you just need to remove the tacking stitches from the other short end. Mine have just come out as it's only one short end, so remove those. Now press it so the seam runs down the centre of the back edge like this. Now I'm going to stuff the handle lightly because it's supposed to look like a teacup handle. Now you can use a couple of things. You can use a couple of narrow strips of wadding for this, or chunky yarn if you've got any chunky wool that you can put through it. It's just something to give it a little padding. You don't have to do this, but it just gives it more of a teacup handle look. I found the easiest way to do this was to attach my yarn or my wadding to a bodkin. If you don't have one of these, you could use a large-eyed needle or you could use a safety pin. But if you place it inside and then pull it through very gently, if you're using wadding, don't pull the wadding, make sure you pull the bodkin or the safety pin, because if you pull the wadding at all, the fibres will separate. So just very gently, particularly if you hold the bottom short end and then pull it through, just do it gently and pull it through. So if you cut your wadding or your yarn longer, then it's easy if you can pull it through so you've got a little bit sticking out either side. And this just gives it a slightly padded, rounded look. Now, making sure the seam is running down the centre, tack it together close to each edge, and this just holds everything straight. Once you've done that, trim off the excess wadding or yarn from either end, and then your teacup handle is finished. Now, take the mug pouch front and separate it, fold it so the lining is sticking outwards, because you want to pin it into place without the lining in the way. Now, to pin it into place, measure 2 centimetres down from that top of that top stitch seam, and then measure another 5 centimetres down from this on the right hand edge of the outer. Now place the handle right sides down on top so that the top edge of the handle is matching up with that 2 centimetre pin like this, and then pin that into place, and then bend the handle round, making sure it doesn't get twisted, and place the top end of that handle on that pin. Now you can see that the handle is sloping inwards, which is important, so make sure the raw edges of the handle and the front outer match up, and you'll get that nice sloped look. Now tack it into place at either end. I've also tacked it into place a little further inwards just to keep the handle laying in the right position during assembly. So now the handle is attached to the pouch. Assembling the mug pouch. Open up the zip just about halfway and place the front outer and the back outer of the pouch so they are right sides facing and all the raw edges are matching up, and then place the right side of the lining pieces so that all the raw edges are matching up. Now pin the outer pieces together along that bottom straight edge. Now you need to pin it together at the seams. The tab needs to be facing towards the lining fabrics, and the top stitched edges need to be matching up exactly. So fold it, you'll see the tab is almost folded in half so it's facing towards the lining, and just make sure those top stitch edges are lying right on top of each other, and pop a pin, and then you can pin the other side of the outer together, turn it around and open it up. And again, make sure the tab is folded in half and facing towards the lining, and then the top stitch edge of the front and the back of the pouch are lying right on top of each other. That'll give you a nice neat finish. So put a pin in this place to just hold those seams together. Now you can pin the rest of the pouch together. So pin down this side edge of the outers. This is where the handles are. Pin the lining pieces together. You can pin the straight edge together first, and then pop a pin in the side curved edge. And then put a pin in the other side curved edge. Now you need to leave a turning gap in the centre of the bottom edge of the lining. So fold it in half just to find the centre. And just make a little crease. And then if you measure 2 centimetres either side of this, a 4 centimetre turning gap is absolutely fine. So measure and mark with vertical pins so that you remember that these are the edges of the turning gap. Just pop those into place. Now sew the whole thing together, starting at one side of the turning gap, stitching all the way round, across the bottom of the outers, up the other side, and finishing the other side of the turning gap. When you reach the ends of the zip tabs, Stitch close to, but not into the zip tabs, as close as you can get to the edges of the zip tab without actually sewing into them. You'll be able to feel this with your machine needle while you're sewing. Now once that's sewn, to reduce some of the bulk in the corners, because it's quite a little pouch, just clip off the corners. So clip diagonally across and then take a little bit of excess out. Also, clip a little bit of the fabric that's where the seams lie at the top, where the zip is. Just because you've got several turned under edges here and it's quite bulky, you'll just get a neater finish if you just cut those. Cut them to about 1/8 of an inch. Oh, and don't forget, you need to clip off the corners of the lining as well before you turn it right sides out. Again, if you can reduce bulk in these areas, you'll just get a flatter pouch. So put your fingers inside the turning gap and grab hold of the bottom of the pouch and push it all the way through, and then turn the whole pouch right sides out through that little gap. If you ease it out slowly, it will come out. And then push out all of the corners. You can open the zip fully now. Now you need to turn the turning gap closed. So just push out the corners and flatten it out. Make sure the edges of the turning gap are folded to the inside and top stitch across the bottom. That holds the turning gap closed. You can now remove those extra tacking stitches that you put in to hold the handle straight. Take out the stitches and remove the thread. So just take out the rest of the stitches. Now all you need to do now is just push out the edges of those zip tabs. If you put your hand inside, you can push out the corners as well. You'll need to press those later. And then just push out the corners, the edges of those zip tabs. So if you work from the inside, you can push them out and then they'll lie in a nice curve at the end of the zip, which makes the zip tab much neater. So your little teacup zip pouch is now finished. You can pop tea bags inside, or coffee sachets, sugars, small biscuits. Close up the zip. Then you can fill up your mug bag. So here's the mug bag that you've already made. You can use the front pocket, again, to put tea bags in, or any other small snacks. Then get your mug mat and place this inside the base. It will fit exactly in the base, which gives a little bit of structure to the base. It also adds some padding to your mug. Pop your mug inside and then put your tea pouch in there and do it up. You can use then the mug mat when you take your mug out. Close up the spring toggle, pull the cord, and there you go. Your beautiful mug mag set is now finished.